Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you 4 ways of making fabric in Blender. The first 3 ways are going to be using various physics and properties that you may well be familiar with in Blender in different ways to create different effects. So we're going to be looking at using gravity and the cloth properties to create a bedsheet. We're going to be looking at using hooks and vertex groups to create a pair of curtains. And we're going to be looking at some of the modifiers, for example the force field, to create a pillow. The fourth way is going to be using the cloth brush that you'll find in Sculpt Mode to basically sculpt into a cloth texture into any surface of any model you've already got. So without further ado, we'll jump straight into our first method, which is using gravity and the cloth physics properties. So here I've got the default cube in Blender. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select that, type S on my keyboard to scale it. I'm going to type S and Z to just flatten that out, S and Y to create basically the base of my bed there. I've applied 2 transformations there, scale, and I've moved it ever so slightly. So I need to apply those transformations in order for subsequent processes to work accurately. And you may never know what's ahead of you, so get used to doing this. Anytime you scale something or rotate it, type Ctrl A on your keyboard and apply all those transformations. It's a bit of a fail-safe against future processes. So there's the base of my bed there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click off that, I'm going to go to Add, Mesh, and I'm going to add a plane. I'm going to type G on my keyboard and Z to move it straight up, and I'm going to scale it. I want this to be bigger than the bed, so I'm going to go to the top right hand corner where the gyro is. I'm going to click on Z, so I've got a completely vertical view. I'm going to type S and drag that until it's bigger than the bed. S and X there just to stretch it out. And again, Control A, apply all transformations because I've moved it and I've scaled it. Okay, so effectively what we're going to do is we've got our bed sheet hovering over the bed there. We're going to apply physics so that it drops down and it molds naturally. So instead of having to sculpt something, we can create our bed at the base here, or whatever object it is you want the cloth being applied to, and then just let the cloth drop down and mold itself. So it's a bit more realistic. To do that, I'm going to click on the fabric here, the panel if you like, and we're going to go to the physics properties palette in the right hand side here. You'll see it's a circle with a kind of moon orbiting it. If we click on that, we get a few different settings that we'll actually be using throughout this video, and the one we're most interested in is cloth. And we get loads of different settings that we can change, and as usual with Blender, create exactly what we're looking for. Don't be too intimidated by this, because on the right hand side here we've got a cloth presets panel, and if we open that up, you can see we've got all these different types of material that will change all these settings to best mimic it. So if I click on cotton, that's what the current setting is. So effectively we're going to create an animation because the bedsheet is going to drop on top. So we've got our timeline at the bottom here. We've applied the cloth physics. Let's play this and see what we get. Not an awful lot. So the panel just drops all the way through and passes through the bed that we've created at the bottom there. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add a collision to the bed here. We need to tell Blender that this cannot pass through this object here. So we just click on it, go to physics properties, and we click on collision. It is that easy. And now when we play, it stops. The second thing we need to do is click on the bed sheet that we've got, or the fabric you're making, go to edit mode, and we need to subdivide it. And I tend to subdivide by going about halfway down the side here where it says loop cut. Click on that. I'm going to change the number of cuts to 80 to create quite a detailed mesh. Hit enter to register that. Now I'm going to add some horizontal and some vertical loop cuts there to create a nice detailed mesh, which is going to allow it to basically deform. So when I go back to object mode and I play, you see it's much slower now because we're dealing with more geometry, but when it hits the bed at the base, you can see it wraps around. Few things going on, it's not very detailed and the mesh is glitching through, and it was very slow at the start. Don't be worried if your animation is really slow and lagging at the start. It's effectively rendering. Once it's rendered, and you can tell because you've got a blue bar now on your timeline, you can go back to the start of the animation, and when it plays it'll be much smoother because it's already rendered. Okay, so it's only going to stutter at the start there on your very first pass. So what can we do with this now? Well, we can always go to our modifiers panel, go to add modifier and subdivide the surface to make it a bit more detailed. Remember, you don't have to subdivide a surface to make it appear smoother and more realistic. You can always right click and go to shade smooth, and it goes a long way to achieving that effect. If you subdivide too much, it will slow your system down and it can lead to crashing. Okay, so just be aware that you can always right click and shade smooth if you want it to look realistic. Right click and shade flat to go back. A couple of things we can do just in the physics properties. If we go back to those and under cloth, we can change the number of steps to make the animation more realistic. We can go to collisions to turn on self collisions as well, so the mesh won't glitch through itself. And if we go back, you'll see that it will re-render. So again, it's stuttering. We've made some changes, so it needs to re-render the animation. There we go. And there's a few more creases and the fabric's more ruckled up in the corners there. What I would always recommend as well is currently this is a paper thin plane. Go to the modifiers panel, add modifier and solidify, just to give it a bit of thickness there, and you can see it much clearer if I drag that slider up and down. Remember, you can go in both directions as well if needed. So there we have it, very quick and easy way of making fabric in Blender and getting it to mold and respond to any object you've subsequently made. So in this second part, I'm going to show you how to make a pair of curtains using the same cloth physics that we used previously, but introducing some more elements such as vertex groups and hooks to create these curtains in a more realistic manner. So I've got our default cube. I'm going to click on that, type X and hit enter to delete it. I'm going to go to the top left hand corner of the screen where it says add, and I'm going to add a plane. I'm going to type S on my keyboard to scale it up, R to rotate it, Y to rotate it on the Y axis, and then 90 to rotate it 90 degrees so it's standing perfectly upright. I'm going to type G and Z on my keyboard to just move it a little bit further up as well. Now I've rotated this panel, I have scaled it, and I've also moved it as well. I've applied a few different transformations, and these can cause problems in later steps, like things like texturing, which we're not going to be doing today, but it will cause problems with our animation, which we will be doing. And the only way to fix that and to cover ourselves is to type Control A on our keyboard and apply all transformations. You won't see anything happen, but it's basically a safeguard against future steps. Okay, so here's our curtains. What we need to do is go to Object Mode and go down to Edit. And we need to subdivide this so we've got something to work with. It will allow the mesh to crease and fold back. So we're going to go about halfway down to where it says loop cut, and at the top left where it says number of cuts, we're going to change this number to something like 40. As usual, at the end we can subdivide this and make it appear smoother and what have you, but to start off with, 40 will do just fine. So I'm going to click on my mesh, I'm going to add horizontal and vertical loop cuts so I get this nice subdivided mesh here, and that's plenty to work on for now. I'm then going to go to the top left to my select tool, and I'm going to make sure that I'm on vertex select. Out of the three here, we've got vertex, edge and face select. You want to be on vertex select. And these vertices at the top, these are basically where my hooks are going to be. And to add a hook that we can animate with, all you need to do is click on one of the vertices and type Control H on your keyboard. You'll get this little menu that appears, and we're interested in the first option, which is hook to new object. And you can see that a cursor appears, and that is my hook. That is what I'm going to be using to animate with. And you just go along and add as many as you want. Control H, hook, Control H, Control H again, and we'll add a final one at the end. Okie doke. So, currently we've got our hooks and we've got our mesh ready to animate. What we need to do, these vertices here, where the hooks are, these are basically our controllers. These are going to control and drag along the rest of the mesh. And in order to do that, we need to turn them into a vertex group. It's very easy to do. You just select one of the vertices, hold Shift, and then select the rest. You see here we've selected all those vertices, they're all appearing orange. We go to Object Data Properties in the bottom right hand corner, the green triangle. And you see we've got vertex groups here. We've got nothing there currently, so we're going to add a new group and we're going to assign that group to the vertices we've got selected there by just clicking Assign. That's all you have to do. You'll know if it's worked because you've got Select and Deselect on the right hand side. If I click on Deselect, all of those vertices go straight back to black. And if I select, they go orange. So we know that this group is working. So let's go to Object Mode, and we need to add our cloth properties to this mesh. Currently it's just a subdivided mesh. We need to add all the cloth physics. So we're going to go to the physics properties, click on cloth just like we did with the previous example, and we're going to go to the presets again, and we're going to change this one to silk because it drapes a little more effectively. So now what we're going to do is we are going to just change a few of the settings in the cloth menu. We need to go all the way down to the bottom, and where it says shape, we need to open up that group. And you see where it says pin group, so we need to pin the vertex group we just created to this mesh. And we just click on it, and it's the only option that we've got. Okay, so that vertex group needs to be applied in the shape menu, and it'll probably be the only one that you've got. Next thing we need to do is go down to collisions. And we need to turn on self collisions so that the mesh isn't glitching through itself. It all works fine, it folds back nice and evenly. At the bottom of our screen here where we've got a timeline, we can actually play this now, and you can see that the fabric is starting to sag in the middle between those hooks, so we know that they're working. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create the animation, which is going to create all those lovely folds and create the piece of fabric for me. So I'm going to drag up my timeline. I'm going to select all the hooks just by dragging a selection box over them. And I'm going to type I, which is going to insert a keyframe. And I want to insert a location keyframe. This is basically saying that at the very start of my animation, this is where I want the hooks to be located. You can see an orange diamond has appeared in the timeline editor, so we know it's worked. Then I'm going to drag my slider along however many frames I wish. The longer you drag that for, the longer this will take to draw back. And I'm going to select the rest of the keyframes because I'm dragging it to the left, so the first one can stay where it is. I'm going to grab Y, G, Y again, and move those all to the side, as though they're being drawn back. Select them all again, I, location, so I'm telling Blender that at the end of my animation, this is where I want those hooks to be located. Go straight back to the start of the animation, and now we're going to click play. Glitches out a little bit, that's fine. We're going to drag that back, right click and go to Shade Smooth. Oh, it's not shaded. Shade Smooth. There we go. We're going to play it again, and there we go. You can see our animation is now really lovely, and it's just slowly coming into effect. So it's quite bulky, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play that animation. And I'm going to go to Modifiers, Add Modifier, and Subdivide Surface. Go to the start again. And we can see it's just a little more realistic. Let's actually apply that subdivision. You see it's really slow now because we're dealing with many more faces. just like the previous animation, once it has actually completed, we'll go back to the start, and there we are. So I've rendered this out fully now, so we've got our curtains bagged up there. If I go back to the start, we can see that playing nice and smoothly. And there are my curtains. So currently we've got all our physics and properties applying to this. Once we've got it how we want it, we can just go and delete all the hooks on the right hand side here. We can apply the cloth properties, apply all of that, delete the hook cursors that are still left in, and there is our curtain mesh that now we can rotate, grab, move into position, texture, however we like. So there is how to create a set of curtains in Blender using the cloth physics and using vertex groups and hooks. So for our third method, we're going to go and create a pillow, and we're going to apply the same cloth physics as we did previously with the previous two methods, but we're now going to introduce force field, another way of interacting with the object. So we've got the default cube here, and we're going to keep that. We're going to scale it up by typing S on our keyboard. I'm going to type S again and Z to scale it on the Z axis just to flatten it out. I don't want it completely flat, I want a bit of an edge to it. I've applied a transformation, so as usual, Control A, apply all transformations. I'm going to go to the top left into edit mode. I'm going to go to the loop cut tool, and I'm going to change it to something about 50. This will be quite low, but we want to see what the animation's doing first. And we're going to add loop cuts one way and then the other. And then we're going to bring the number right back down to 1, and we're going to add one line around the edge like so, just one. We'll go back to object mode, and we're going to go to the physics properties on the right hand side here, and we're going to apply the cloth physics, and we're going to go to the presets, and we're going to change it to silk just like we did with the curtains. A couple of things we need to change. We actually need to go down to shape, we need to go down to collisions, and we need to turn on self collisions again so nothing's glitching through. And we'll increase the quality as well because the force field is going to really stretch this mesh, so we're going to make it quite high quality. At the very bottom we have field weights, which we haven't been into yet. And currently we have gravity set to 1. Gravity is affecting our mesh, and it's been important in the other two examples. The bed sheet needs to drop onto the bed and the curtains need to hang down. With this pillow we don't need gravity at all, so we're going to drag that all the way to the left so it says 0. Now we need to apply the force field, and it's very easy to do. You just type in Shift A when you've got your cube selected, Shift A, you see force field appears at the bottom here, and we're going to click on force, or you'll get this groovy kind of rings, almost like a radar, appearing in the center of your cube. And we'll see we've got some settings for the force field. We're only interested in one for now, the strength. The strength is currently set to 1, and that's very, very weak. So we're going to bump it up to something like 200 and hit enter. Now all we need to do is click play on our timeline, and you can see our mesh slowly starting to inflate. Now you pause this whenever it's done, whenever you are happy with the size of the pillow you've made. So I'm going to pause it there, and you can see that it's inflated the mesh and created the pillow shape that we need. As usual, it's rendered our animation the first time round, so the next time we play it, it's much, much smoother. So what I can do now is apply all our usual modifiers, click on the object, go to the modifiers panel, and we can subdivide it to make it a bit smoother. Again, I really do want to emphasize that you don't need to subdivide it just to make it appear smoother. You can right click and go to shade smooth, and it appears like so. In this case it is a little glitchy, so I may be tempted to actually do that. Once you've done this and you've got the pillow inflated, click on the force field and delete it, and then click on the object, apply the cloth modifier, and you have a static mesh that you can then move, transform, and apply your textures to. So for the final part of this video, it's going to be a real quick, easy little demonstration of how to use the cloth brush that you'll find in Sculpt Mode. So currently we've been looking at using physics, using gravity, using force fields to create fabrics, objects, shapes, etc, etc. But now I'm going to show you how to use the cloth brush so that you can create anything just by sculpting and then apply a cloth texture to it. So here we've got the cube. I'm going to type X and enter to delete that. And for the purposes of demonstration, I'm just going to add a plane, scale that up, Control A, and apply all the transformations as usual. I'm going to go to edit mode and apply a load of loop cuts to create a really detailed mesh, something really nice to work with. I'm going to bump it up to 100 and apply those loop cuts so we've got a nice detailed mesh. I'm now going to go straight down to Sculpt Mode, and you see all our usual sculpting tools here. If we scroll down, you can see that we've got this purple icon, and when we hover over it says cloth. And we get a cursor that will allow us to basically start sculpting. As usual, you can see the orange dot slightly above my cursor, so we've got symmetry turned on. So I'm going to go to my brush settings, go down to symmetry on the right hand side here, and turn off X so that there's no symmetry occurring. So like all brushes, you're just clicking and dragging, and you may notice at first that nothing actually happens when you click and drag with the cloth brush, certainly not on a flat plane like this. And what you need to do is you need to go into your brush settings, which is the screwdriver and the spanner, and you see here that we've got a couple of settings here called deformation and force fall off. If we go to deformation here and click where it says drag, we can go and see all these different, effectively all these different subtools that are going to change how our cloth brush is interacting with our object. So for example, if I click on grab and now I start sculpting, you can see that it's grabbing the texture and treating it like a piece of cloth. And naturally, when you hover over all these options, they're pretty much what they say on the tin. So if I click on inflate, it will start inflating the material, and you can see that it kind of has a radius and it creates all these different textures. So real nice and easy, that one. So anything that you've made currently, you can very easily get the cloth brush and start manipulating it like so. As usual, whenever you're sculpting, be aware of the geometry, the resolution of that. Turn on dynamic topology in the top right is one way of avoiding this, and of course subdividing your mesh, remeshing, things we'll cover in a future video. But for now, hopefully, those 4 methods will show you how to create all these different kinds of objects involving fabric, and will make things much, much easier for you in your future projects.